23 black celebrities who tragically died of AIDS that you didn't know about. Behind the spotlight, behind the applause, behind the fame, there was a silence that killed. This video is not just about celebrities. It's about black excellence erased by fear, stigma, and a deadly epidemic. From music icons to athletes, filmmakers, and pioneers, these lives were cut short while the world looked away. Some were silenced by shame, others by systems that refused to protect them. As you watch, ask yourself, how many truths were buried so comfort could survive? If stories like these matter to you, subscribe to Black Excellence Legends and drop a comment, because silence should never win again. Howard Rollins. Howard Rollins was one of the most gifted actors of his generation, a performer whose intensity and intelligence left a lasting imprint on American film and television. Rising to prominence in the late 1970s, Rollins first captured critical attention with his breakout role in Ragtime, 1981, which earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. At a time when complex, authoritative roles for black actors were still rare, his commanding presence signaled a shift in how black masculinity and intellect could be portrayed on screen. He later became widely recognized for his work on television, most notably in the Heat of the Night, where his restrained power and emotional depth helped elevate the series into a cultural landmark. Rollins was praised not only for his talent, but for the quiet dignity he brought to characters navigating authority, race, and moral responsibility. By his mid-30s, he had already secured Emmy and Golden Globe recognition, achievements that placed him firmly among Hollywood's elite. Behind the accolades, however, Rollins was fighting a private battle shaped by the harsh realities of the 1980s and early 1990s. During an era when HIV/AIDS was burdened by fear, misinformation, and stigma, particularly within black communities, many public figures chose silence over disclosure. Rollins was among them. According to medical records and later confirmations, he had been living with HIV for years before his health visibly declined. As treatment options were still limited before the widespread use of effective antiretroviral therapy in the mid-1990s, complications escalated rapidly. Howard Rollins died in 1996 at the age of 46. The immediate cause was lymphoma, a cancer frequently associated with advanced AIDS at the time. His passing marked the loss of a remarkable career that had not yet reached its full potential. Yet reducing his legacy to the circumstances of his death would be a disservice. Rollins represents a generation of artists who endured not only professional pressure, but a public climate that made honesty dangerous. Today, his story resonates as both a celebration of artistic excellence and a sobering reminder of an epidemic that claimed countless lives before understanding and compassion caught up. Howard Rollins remains remembered for his brilliance, his restraint, and the powerful roles that continue to speak long after the screen fades to black. Raymond St. Jacques. Raymond St. Jacques was a trailblazing figure in American cinema, one of the first black actors to command leading roles with authority and elegance during an era defined by racial barriers. Emerging in the late 1960s and early 1970s, he gained recognition for his powerful performances in films such as Cotton Comes to Harlem, 1970, and Come Back, Charleston Blue. His deep, resonant voice and composed screen presence projected intelligence and self-assurance at a time when black characters were often marginalized or stereotyped. Beyond film, St. Jacques also appeared on television, steadily building a reputation as a disciplined and serious artist. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he maintained a carefully guarded private life. Colleagues described him as reserved, meticulous, and deeply committed to his craft. This discretion, while preserving his dignity, also contributed to the silence that surrounded his declining health later in life. Raymond St. Jacques died in 1990 at the age of 60. The official cause of death was listed as lymphoma, a form of cancer that, during that period, was frequently associated with advanced AIDS. At the height of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, public disclosure often meant career destruction and social exile, especially for Black entertainers. As a result, many families chose privacy over transparency, and St. Jacques' illness was never openly discussed during his lifetime. His death came quietly, without the media spectacle that often follows celebrity passings. Yet his absence was deeply felt within artistic circles. Today, Raymond St. stands as a symbol of a generation forced to navigate fame, identity, and illness in silence. His legacy endures not only through his film work, but through the doors he helped open for Black actors seeking respect, complexity, and leading roles in American cinema. Larry Riley. Larry Riley was a rising television star whose warmth and relatability made him instantly recognizable to audiences in the 1980s. He first gained attention with his role in A Soldier Story, 1984. But it was his recurring appearance on the hit series Knots Landing that cemented his place in American television. Riley possessed a rare ability to convey sincerity and emotional nuance, qualities that resonated strongly with viewers and critics alike. At a time when television was expanding opportunities for Black actors, Riley appeared poised for long-term success. Off-screen, he was known as professional, soft-spoken, and intensely private. Friends later recalled that even as his health deteriorated, he remained committed to his work, refusing to allow personal struggles to overshadow his responsibilities on set. Larry Riley died in 1992 at just 39 years old. His death was caused by AIDS-related complications, a fact that was confirmed but rarely discussed publicly at the time. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, HIV/AIDS remained heavily stigmatized, and disclosure often carried devastating personal and professional consequences. Like many entertainers of that era, Riley chose privacy, continuing to work for as long as his body allowed. His passing sent a quiet shock through the television industry. There were no major tributes, no lengthy retrospectives, only a sudden absence where a promising career once stood. In retrospect, Riley's story reflects the hidden toll of the AIDS crisis on Hollywood's rising talents, many of whom disappeared before their potential could be fully realized. Today, Larry Riley is remembered as a gifted actor whose career was tragically shortened. His work remains a reminder of a generation lost not only to disease, but to a culture of fear that made silence seem safer than truth. Alvin Ailey. Alvin Ailey was not merely a dancer or choreographer. He was a cultural architect who transformed modern dance into a powerful expression of Black identity, resilience, and spiritual depth. Born in Texas and shaped by the realities of segregation, Ailey founded the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater in 1958, creating a platform that elevated Black dancers to international prominence. His most celebrated work, Revelations, remains one of the most performed modern dance pieces in history, seen by millions worldwide. Ailey's influence extended far beyond choreography. He reshaped how Black stories could be told through movement, blending gospel, blues, and modern technique into a language of liberation. By the 1970s and 1980s, his company had become a global ambassador of American culture, performing in over 70 countries and earning widespread critical acclaim. Despite his public success, Ailey lived with intense personal pressure and guarded privacy. He died in 1989 at the age of 58. The official announcement cited a blood disorder, but it was later confirmed that he died from complications related to AIDS. At the time, HIV/AIDS carried enormous stigma, particularly within the Black community and the arts world. Ailey reportedly feared that public disclosure would overshadow his life's work. His death marked a profound loss to the arts, yet his legacy proved indestructible. The company he built continued to thrive, and Revelations remains a defining work of modern dance. Alvin Ailey's story is inseparable from the history of the AIDS epidemic, but it is not defined by it. Instead, he is remembered as a visionary who used art to confront pain, celebrate faith, and affirm humanity. His life stands as enduring proof that even in silence, greatness can speak volumes. Max Robinson. Max Robinson was a historic figure in American journalism, a man who redefined what authority and credibility looked like on national television. In 1978, he became the first black anchor of ABC World News Tonight, breaking a racial barrier that had stood since the birth of network news. His calm delivery, sharp intellect, and commanding presence earned the trust of millions of viewers at a time when black journalists were still fighting for visibility and respect. Robinson's career, however, was not without resistance. He openly spoke about the pressures of navigating a predominantly white media landscape and the emotional toll of being constantly scrutinized. By the early 1980s, his role at ABC began to diminish, and he gradually withdrew from the spotlight. To the public, his absence was framed as burnout or personal choice. Privately, his health was deteriorating. Max Robinson died in 1988 at the age of 49. His death was officially attributed to pneumonia, but medical professionals later confirmed it was linked to complications from AIDS. According to reliable reports, Robinson likely contracted HIV from a blood transfusion following a serious car accident in the early 1980s, a period before blood screening for HIV became standard practice in the United States. During that era, AIDS was still widely misunderstood and heavily stigmatized, especially for public figures. Disclosure often meant public humiliation and professional exile. Robinson chose privacy, a decision shaped not by shame, but by survival in a media culture unprepared for compassion. In his final years, he lived quietly, surrounded by books and family, far removed from the cameras that once defined his life. Max Robinson's legacy endures as a reminder that pioneers often pay a personal price for progress. His death highlighted not only the devastating reach of the AIDS epidemic, but also how even national icons were forced into silence by fear and ignorance. Bobby DeBarge. Bobby DeBarge was one of the most distinctive voices in R&B history, a fragile brilliance wrapped in extraordinary talent. As the falsetto lead of the DeBarge family group, he helped define the sound of 1980s soul with hits like I Like It and All This Love. His voice carried vulnerability, longing, and emotional depth that set him apart in an era dominated by polished pop perfection. Behind the success, Bobby's life unraveled under the weight of addiction and industry pressure. Fame arrived quickly, but stability never followed. As drug dependency tightened its grip, relationships fractured, and his presence in the music world faded. By the late 1980s, he had largely disappeared from the charts, replaced by rumors and speculation. Bobby DeBarge died in 1995 at the age of 39. The cause of death was AIDS-related complications, a fact later confirmed by family members. He had contracted HIV years earlier, reportedly through intravenous drug use during the height of his addiction. At the time, HIV treatment options were limited, and stigma was overwhelming, particularly within the Black community and the music industry. Rather than receiving public support, Bobby faced isolation. The industry that once celebrated his talent fell silent as his health declined. In his final years, he lived quietly, physically weakened but emotionally reflective, often revisiting his past work. Friends and family described a man deeply aware of his mistakes, yet still profoundly gifted. Bobby DeBarge's story is not merely one of tragedy, but of lost potential magnified by a public culture that punished vulnerability. His voice remains timeless, echoing as both a testament to brilliance and a reminder of how the AIDS crisis erased entire chapters of musical history. Willie Smith. Willie Smith was a revolutionary force in American fashion, a designer who reshaped how style intersected with identity, accessibility, and cultural pride. As the founder of the label Willie Wear, Smith pioneered a vision of fashion that was inclusive, functional, and deeply rooted in urban life. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, His designs reached unprecedented commercial success, generating millions in annual revenue and making him one of the most influential black designers of his era. Smith's work blurred the lines between streetwear and high fashion long before the concept became mainstream. His clothes were worn by everyday people as well as cultural tastemakers, reflecting his belief that fashion should serve real lives, not exclusivity. At the height of his career, Smith was a regular presence in New York's creative elite, admired for both his talent and his generosity. In 1987, Willie Smith died at the age of 39. Officially, the cause of death was pneumonia. However, it was later acknowledged by those close to him that his illness was related to AIDS, a reality rarely spoken aloud at the time. During the 1980s, AIDS carried profound stigma, especially within industries dependent on public image and commercial trust. Smith's declining health was largely hidden from the public. As his condition worsened, he withdrew from social life, leaving behind a fashion empire that would soon collapse without his leadership. His death sent shockwaves through the design world, raising painful questions about silence, loss, and the creative lives cut short by the epidemic. Today, Willie Smith is recognized not only as a fashion innovator, but as a symbol of an era when talent flourished amid fear. His influence lives on in modern streetwear and inclusive design, proving that even when history tries to look away, true impact cannot be erased. Essex Hemphill. Marlon Riggs was one of the most fearless intellectual voices in American documentary film, a creator who refused comfort and demanded truth. As a filmmaker, poet, and professor, Riggs challenged the nation to confront race, sexuality, and identity at a time when such conversations were actively suppressed. His most influential work, Tongues Untied, 1989, shattered long-standing silences by centering the lived experiences of Black gay men, blending poetry, testimony, and political critique into a form that was both radical and deeply personal. Riggs's work was controversial not because it lacked rigor, but because it was unapologetically honest. He faced political attacks, funding battles, and public backlash, yet he remained unwavering in his commitment to visibility. While teaching at the University of California, Berkeley, he mentored students even as his own health began to fail. By the early 1990s, Riggs had been diagnosed with HIV, a reality he did not publicly foreground, choosing instead to let his art speak louder than his illness. Marlon Riggs died in 1994 at the age of 37 from complications related to AIDS. At the time, effective treatment options were still limited, and the disease carried enormous stigma, particularly for Black LGBTQ+ individuals. Even as his condition worsened, Riggs continued to work, completing Black Is, Black Ain't, a film that explored the complexity of Black identity and belonging. Much of the project was finished from his hospital bed, underscoring his refusal to let illness silence his voice. Riggs' death marked a profound loss, not only to cinema, but to cultural discourse itself. His legacy endures as a testament to courage under pressure. He did not frame himself as a victim of AIDS, but as a thinker who insisted that marginalized lives deserve to be seen, documented, and remembered. Marlon Riggs remains a symbol of artistic resistance in the face of erasure. Marlon Riggs. Alan Wiggins was once one of Major League Baseball's most electrifying talents, a player whose speed and athletic instinct set him apart on the field. Drafted by the San Diego Padres, Wiggins quickly became known for his explosive base-stealing ability and relentless energy. By the mid-1980s, he was regarded as one of the fastest players in professional baseball, capable of changing the outcome of a game in a single moment. Yet behind the promise of stardom, Wiggins struggled with injuries and substance abuse, challenges that quietly derailed his career. As playing opportunities diminished, he slipped further from public view, and by the late 1980s, his name had largely disappeared from sports headlines. To fans, his absence seemed sudden and unexplained. Alan Wiggins died in 1991 at the age of 32. The cause of death was complications related to AIDS, a fact that emerged amid conflicting reports and family privacy. According to medical accounts, Wiggins had contracted HIV during a period marked by heavy drug use, including needle sharing, a known risk factor at a time when awareness and prevention were still dangerously inadequate. In his final years, Wiggins lived away from the spotlight, his health deteriorating rapidly as infections and immune failure took hold. The baseball world, often slow to confront uncomfortable realities, offered little public acknowledgement of his struggle. His death exposed the vulnerability of professional athletes who were often assumed to be invincible but received minimal support once they fell outside the system. Alan Wiggins' story is a sobering reminder that talent alone cannot shield individuals from addiction, illness, or stigma. His life reflects a period when AIDS moved silently through communities, leaving behind unanswered questions and unfinished careers. Today, Wiggins is remembered not only for his speed on the base pass, but for the harsh reality that even elite athletes were not spared from the epidemic's reach. Alan Wiggins. Glenn Burke occupies a unique place in sports history as both a gifted baseball player and a quiet pioneer of personal authenticity. Playing for the Los Angeles Dodgers and later the Oakland Athletics, Burke was known for his athleticism, infectious energy, and defensive skill. He is also widely credited as the originator of the celebratory high five, a gesture that would become globally iconic. Despite his talent, Burke's career was undermined by prejudice. As one of the first openly gay players in Major League Baseball, he faced discrimination that limited his opportunities and ultimately forced him out of the league. Contracts evaporated, support vanished, and a once promising career ended prematurely, not because of performance, but because of intolerance. After leaving baseball, Burke struggled financially and emotionally. Cut off from the sport he loved, he drifted through unstable living conditions, relying on friends within the LGBTQ+ community for support. During this period, he contracted HIV, likely in the early years of the AIDS epidemic, when prevention information was scarce and stigma overwhelming. Glenn Burke died in 1995 at the age of 42 from AIDS-related complications. By the time of his death, his body bore the visible marks of advanced illness, including Kaposi's sarcoma. He passed away largely forgotten by the baseball establishment, receiving little acknowledgement from the league that once benefited from his talent. In the years since, Burke's legacy has been re-examined and reclaimed. He is now recognized as a figure who paid an enormous personal price for living honestly in an era that offered no protection. His story intersects with the AIDS crisis as a stark example of how discrimination, silence, and disease combine to erase lives from public memory. Glenn Burke is remembered today not only as an athlete, but as a symbol of resilience in the face of systemic exclusion. Glenn Burke. Glenn Burke's life represents one of the most painful intersections between talent, truth, and rejection in American sports history. As an outfielder for the Los Angeles Dodgers and later the Oakland Athletics, Burke possessed speed, agility, and a magnetic personality that made him popular with teammates and fans alike. He is widely credited with originating the celebratory high five, a spontaneous moment of joy that later became a universal symbol of victory across global sports culture. Despite his promise, Burke's career was derailed not by lack of ability, but by discrimination. At a time when Major League Baseball offered no protection for LGBTQ+ athletes, Burke lived openly as a gay man. Rather than receiving support, he was marginalized, traded, and gradually pushed out of the league. Opportunities disappeared, and the sport he loved turned its back on him. After leaving professional baseball, Burke's life grew increasingly unstable. Without the financial or institutional support afforded to former players, he struggled with housing insecurity and isolation. During the early years of the AIDS epidemic, when fear outweighed facts and stigma outweighed compassion, Burke contracted HIV. Medical care was limited, and public understanding was dangerously shallow. Glenn Burke died in 1995 at the age of 42 from AIDS-related complications. By the time of his death, his health had severely deteriorated, marked by opportunistic infections and Kaposi sarcoma. He passed away quietly, largely ignored by the baseball establishment that once benefited from his talent. In later years, Burke's story has been reclaimed as a symbol of resilience and injustice. He is now remembered not only for his athletic contributions, but for the cost of honesty in a system unprepared for difference. Glenn Burke's life exposes how silence, prejudice, and disease combine to erase gifted individuals, and why their stories must be told truthfully. Ron Richardson. Ron Richardson was a towering presence in American musical theater, celebrated for a voice that carried depth, authority, and emotional resonance. He rose to prominence on Broadway with performances that commanded attention, most notably earning a Tony Award for his role in Big River. At a time when black male leads were still underrepresented on Broadway, Richardson stood as proof that talent could break through even the most entrenched barriers. Beyond accolades, Richardson was respected as a disciplined performer who treated the stage as both craft and calling. Colleagues described him as focused, private, and deeply committed to excellence. Even as his health began to decline in the early 1990s, he continued to rehearse and perform whenever possible, refusing to let physical weakness define his professional identity. Ron Richardson died in 1995 at the age of 42 after a prolonged illness linked to AIDS. During that era, many performers chose silence out of fear of losing work, respect, and dignity. AIDS was still widely misunderstood, and public disclosure often meant immediate social and professional isolation. Richardson's illness remained largely private, known only to family and close friends. By the time he was hospitalized, his condition had advanced significantly. Yet even in his final months, he reportedly remained mentally engaged with theater, scripts, and music. His death marked a quiet but profound loss to Broadway, one that did not receive the recognition his contributions deserved. Today, Ron Richardson is remembered as a gifted artist whose voice was silenced too soon, not only by disease, but by an industry unprepared to confront the realities of the AIDS crisis. His legacy endures in recorded performances and in the history of Black excellence on the American stage. Kevin Peter Hall. Kevin Peter Hall was a unique figure in Hollywood, a performer whose physical presence made cinematic history even as his face remained largely unseen. Standing over 7 feet tall, Hall brought life to some of the most iconic characters of 1980s science fiction, including the Predator and the gentle Bigfoot in Harry and the Hendersons. His performances required not only stature, but precision, patience, and emotional control. Unlike many actors, Hall's success depended on disappearing into characters rather than being recognized for celebrity appeal. Behind the scenes, he was known as thoughtful, soft-spoken, and highly respected by colleagues. His career was steadily expanding when an unexpected medical crisis altered everything. In the late 1980s, Hall was involved in a serious car accident that required surgery and a blood transfusion. This occurred during a period when HIV screening procedures were not yet fully standardized. Medical experts later concluded that Hall likely contracted HIV through contaminated blood. For years, he experienced unexplained illness before his immune system collapsed. Kevin Peter Hall died in 1991 at the age of 35 from AIDS-related complications. His death was not widely discussed in public at the time, reflecting the fear and stigma surrounding HIV/AIDS. Even as awareness grew, many cases tied to blood transfusions remained overshadowed by misunderstanding and silence. Hall's passing represented a tragic loss of a performer whose career was just beginning to reach broader recognition. Today, he is remembered not only for the unforgettable characters he embodied, but as a reminder that the AIDS epidemic affected people far beyond stereotypes. His story underscores the hidden cost of medical gaps and the human lives lost before prevention caught up with reality. Sylvester James Jr., known simply as Sylvester, was one of the most electrifying and fearless figures in the history of disco music. Bursting onto the scene in the late 1970s, his soaring falsetto and flamboyant stage presence challenged rigid ideas of masculinity, gender, and performance. With the global hit You Make Me Feel Mighty Real, Sylvester didn't just create a dance floor anthem, he defined an era. His music radiated joy, freedom, and unapologetic self-expression at a time when many artists still felt pressured to conform. Sylvester's rise was inseparable from San Francisco's vibrant club culture, where disco, liberation, and LGBTQ+ visibility thrived side by side. Yet as the 1980s unfolded, the same communities that celebrated freedom were devastated by the emerging AIDS epidemic. By the mid-1980s, Sylvester had been diagnosed with HIV. Rather than retreat in bitterness, he chose dignity. He continued recording, performing when possible, and surrounding himself with friends and music, even as his health declined. He died in 1988 at the age of 41 from AIDS-related complications. In an era defined by fear and misinformation, Sylvester never publicly framed himself as a victim. Instead, he quietly arranged his affairs and ensured that proceeds from his work would support AIDS charities, a decision that reflected both courage and foresight. Sylvester's death marked more than the loss of a singer. It symbolized the silencing of disco's most radiant spirit. Today, his influence is unmistakable. Modern pop, house, and dance music still echo his vocal style and fearless authenticity. Sylvester is remembered not for how he died, but for how boldly he lived, turning joy into resistance and music into liberation. Jermaine Stewart. Jermaine Stewart was a defining voice of 1980s pop and R&B, best remembered for his chart-topping hit, We Don't Have to Take Our Clothes Off. Unlike many novelty-driven pop successes, Stewart's music carried a subtle message of intimacy, consent, and emotional connection, qualities that set him apart in an era dominated by excess and spectacle. His sleek image, confident vocals, and crossover appeal placed him firmly within the mainstream music landscape. At the height of his career, Stewart appeared unstoppable. He toured internationally, collaborated with major producers, and became a staple of MTV-era pop culture. Yet as musical trends shifted in the early 1990s, his visibility faded. Behind the scenes, his health was deteriorating, though few outside his inner circle were aware. Jermaine Stewart died in 1997 at the age of 39. The cause was complications related to AIDS, though his illness was not widely discussed until after his death. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, many artists avoided public disclosure out of fear of stigma, professional loss, and social rejection, particularly within the Black music community. In his final years, Stewart lived quietly, largely removed from the spotlight that once defined him. Friends later described a man who remained gentle and reflective, still deeply connected to music even as his physical strength waned. His passing shocked fans who remembered him as youthful and vibrant, unaware of the private battle he had been fighting. Jermaine Stewart's story highlights the cruel contrast between public success and private suffering during the AIDS crisis. His legacy lives on through music that continues to sound fresh, emotional, and affirming, proof that even brief moments of stardom can leave a lasting cultural imprint. Fonce Mizell. Fonce Mizell was a behind-the-scenes architect of American soul, funk, and pop music, a songwriter and producer whose influence far exceeded public recognition. As one half of the legendary duo Mizell Brothers, Fonce helped craft the sound of 1970s Black music, working with artists such as Marvin Gaye, the Jackson 5, Donald Byrd, and many others. His compositions blended sophistication with groove, shaping an era that still inspires modern hip-hop and R&B sampling. Unlike front-facing stars, Mizell operated primarily in studios, where creativity thrived, but personal struggles often remained hidden. The long hours, relentless pressure, and excesses of the music industry took their toll. By the 1980s, as AIDS began silently spreading through artistic communities, many creators faced the disease without resources, public awareness, or support. Fonce Mizell died in 1989 at the age of 43. While his death was publicly attributed to a prolonged illness, later accounts confirmed it was related to AIDS. At the time, such realities were rarely acknowledged openly, especially for industry figures whose reputations depended on stability and reliability. Mizell's passing represented a profound loss to music history. Unlike performers whose deaths sparked headlines, his absence was felt quietly, through unfinished projects, abandoned ideas, and a creative void that could not be easily replaced. His work, however, endured. Songs he helped create continue to be rediscovered, sampled, and celebrated by new generations. Fonce Mizell's story underscores how AIDS erased not only stars, but the architects behind the sound. His legacy reminds us that cultural revolutions are often built by those whose names remain in the shadows, even as their influence shapes the world. Hank Gathers. Hank Gathers was one of the most promising young talents in American college basketball, a player whose explosive power and relentless drive made him a national phenomenon almost overnight. As a star forward for Loyola Marymount University, Gathers dominated the court with a rare blend of strength, speed, and scoring ability. During the 1989-1990 season, he led the nation in scoring, averaging over 32 points per game, and was widely expected to become a future NBA standout. To fans, Gathers represented momentum and destiny. Yet behind his physical dominance, warning signs had begun to surface. He experienced episodes of dizziness and fatigue during games, symptoms that were initially treated as manageable health issues rather than red flags. On March 4, 1990, during a nationally televised game, Gathers collapsed on the court after completing a dunk. Despite immediate medical attention, he was pronounced dead at just 23 years old. The official cause of death was a heart condition, specifically a cardiac arrhythmia. However, in the years that followed, speculation emerged regarding other underlying health factors, including rumors linking his death to HIV. It is crucial to state clearly that no verified medical records confirm AIDS as the cause of Hank Gathers' death. Responsible reporting distinguishes documented facts from later speculation, particularly in cases involving young athletes. Gathers' death shook the sports world, forcing institutions to re-examine athlete health, cardiac screening, and the pressure placed on young players to perform despite physical warning signs. His story remains one of lost potential rather than scandal, a reminder that even elite athleticism cannot always protect against unseen medical vulnerabilities. Hank Gathers is remembered today as a brilliant athlete whose life ended far too soon. His legacy lives on not through controversy, but through the profound impact he made in a remarkably short time. Willie Hutch. Willie Hutch was a musical force whose influence shaped the golden age of soul and funk, even if his name never reached the public recognition of the artists he helped elevate. As a songwriter, producer, and performer, Hutch played a critical role in defining the Motown sound beyond the label's early years. His work with Marvin Gaye, the Jackson 5, and Curtis Mayfield helped bridge socially conscious lyricism with infectious rhythm. Hutch's own music career flourished in the early 1970s, particularly through his work on the Foxy Brown soundtrack, which showcased his ability to blend cinematic storytelling with gritty soul. His sound reflected the realities of Black urban life, combining vulnerability with resilience. Behind the scenes, Hutch was respected as disciplined, inventive, and deeply committed to his craft. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Hutch's health began to decline. He continued writing and recording while quietly battling illness, choosing privacy during a period when AIDS was still burdened by fear and misinformation. Willie Hutch died in 1992 at the age of 50. While the official cause of death was pneumonia, later confirmations revealed that he had been living with HIV and died from AIDS-related complications. At the time, many artists avoided public disclosure due to stigma, especially within the Black music community. Hutch's passing was met with subdued acknowledgement despite the magnitude of his contributions. His absence left a noticeable gap in soul music's creative backbone. Today, Willie Hutch is increasingly recognized as a foundational architect of modern soul and R&B. His story reflects the quiet devastation of the AIDS epidemic, how it erased not only stars, but the creators whose work shaped generations of sound. Melvin Franklin. Melvin Franklin was the unmistakable bass voice of the Temptations, a sound so deep and resonant that it became one of the defining elements of Motown's golden era. From classics like My Girl to Papa Was a Rollin' Stone, Franklin's vocals anchored the group's harmonies, providing emotional weight and sonic identity. His presence was steady, dependable, and essential. Unlike some of his bandmates, Franklin largely avoided public controversy, maintaining a relatively private life even as fame surrounded him. By the late 1980s, however, his health began to deteriorate. He suffered from recurring infections, fatigue, and complications that forced him to step away from touring. To the public, these struggles were attributed to general illness, and later, to a stroke. Melvin Franklin died in 1995 at the age of 52. Official statements cited complications following a seizure and stroke, but later family confirmations revealed that Franklin had been living with HIV and that AIDS-related complications significantly weakened his immune system. As with many artists of his era, the diagnosis was kept private due to stigma and fear of public judgment. Franklin's death marked the loss of a cornerstone of Motown history. Unlike flashier frontmen, his power lay in consistency and depth, qualities often overlooked until they are gone. His story illustrates how AIDS silently affected even those whose voices seemed immortal. Today, Melvin Franklin's legacy remains inseparable from the Temptations' enduring catalog. His life reminds us that behind legendary music were human beings navigating fear, illness, and silence during one of the most devastating public health crises in modern history. Orish Grinstead. Orish Grinstead was a voice of promise in late 1990s R&B, a singer whose warmth and youth helped define the sound of the girl group 702. Emerging from Las Vegas, 702 found mainstream success with hits like Where My Girl's At and Stilo, songs that captured the optimism and confidence of a new generation. Grinstead's presence, gentle, melodic, and emotionally grounded, gave the group a balance that resonated with young audiences navigating identity and independence. As the industry shifted and the group's momentum slowed, Grinstead gradually retreated from the spotlight. To fans, her absence seemed like a natural pause in a volatile business. Privately, however, she was fighting a long and devastating illness. According to family statements and medical accounts, Grinstead had been living with HIV since childhood, reportedly contracted through a blood transfusion following a medical procedure when she was very young, years before HIV screening protocols were reliably enforced. By the mid-2000s, her health had deteriorated significantly. She kept her condition private, choosing to protect her family and preserve normalcy in a world that still struggled with compassion around HIV/AIDS. Orish Grinstead died in 2008 at the age of 28 from AIDS-related complications. Her passing shocked fans who remembered her as vibrant and youthful, unaware of the burden she had carried for most of her life. Grinstead's story reframes the AIDS narrative beyond stereotypes, highlighting how systemic medical gaps and silence affected even the youngest patients. Her legacy endures through the music she helped create and the reminder that behind polished pop images are human lives shaped by circumstances far beyond fame. Eazy-E. Eazy-E, born Eric Wright, was a cornerstone of West Coast hip-hop and one of the most influential figures in the genre's history. As a founding member of NWA and the driving force behind Ruthless Records, he helped propel rap from the margins into the cultural mainstream. His raw delivery and unapologetic storytelling gave voice to realities many preferred to ignore, reshaping music and youth culture in the late 1980s and early 1990s. At the height of his influence, Eazy-E appeared unstoppable. Yet in early 1995, his health collapsed suddenly. After being hospitalized with severe pneumonia, doctors diagnosed him with advanced AIDS. Unlike many public figures of the era, Eazy-E chose transparency. He publicly announced his diagnosis, using his platform to warn others about HIV and the consequences of unprotected sex. Eazy-E died in 1995 at the age of 30, just weeks after revealing his illness. His death sent shockwaves through hip-hop, a community that had rarely confronted HIV/AIDS openly. In an industry built on bravado and resilience, his passing forced an uncomfortable reckoning with vulnerability and mortality. While controversy often surrounds his career, the facts of his death are well documented and undisputed. Eazy-E's openness marked a pivotal moment, bringing conversations about HIV/AIDS into a space where they had long been absent. Today, he is remembered both as a pioneer of gangsta rap and as a figure whose final message emphasized responsibility and awareness. His legacy is complex, influential, and inseparable from the cultural shift he helped ignite. David Peaston. David Peaston possessed one of the most powerful, gospel-infused soul voices of his generation, a singer whose emotional clarity elevated every note he delivered. Rising in the late 1980s and early 1990s, he earned acclaim for songs like Two Wrongs Don't Make a Right, which showcased his remarkable range and spiritual intensity. Peaston's voice carried both technical precision and deep vulnerability, earning him industry recognition and a devoted audience. Despite his talent, Peaston never fully embraced celebrity. As musical trends changed, he stepped back from mainstream visibility and focused increasingly on faith and personal reflection. To the public, his reduced presence seemed intentional and peaceful. Privately, his health was failing. According to confirmed reports, Peaston had been living with HIV for years, a diagnosis he kept largely private in a period when stigma remained powerful, particularly within religious and Black communities. David Peaston died in 2012 at the age of 53 from AIDS-related complications. Official statements initially described his death as the result of a prolonged illness, but later confirmations clarified the role HIV played in his decline. By the time of his passing, his body had been weakened by opportunistic infections that effective modern treatments might have prevented had they been available earlier. Peaston's story underscores the quiet toll of AIDS on artists whose faith, humility, and privacy kept them out of headlines. His legacy lives on in recordings that continue to move listeners, reminding us that extraordinary voices can be lost without spectacle, and that truth, when finally spoken, deserves respect rather than judgment. Now that you've heard these stories, one question remains. Were these deaths tragedies of disease or tragedies of silence? How many careers, voices, and futures were lost not just to AIDS, but to fear, denial, and stigma? Imagine how different history might look if honesty had been safer than secrecy. Which story shook you the most, and why? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters here. And if you believe untold stories deserve truth, memory, and respect, stay with Black excellence legends, because legends don't fade, they're erased, unless we remember them.